All right. And welcome back, everyone, to the second half of this second to last session of the Eugene Review Panel. We're going to have a little presentation now from Tyler at Eco Northwest about some economic analysis related to affordability, and then some deliberation time for you all to talk about sort of affordability specifically in the context of HB 2001, and then in the broader context, if you wish. So, Tyler, if you're there, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Hey, I'm here, Lynn, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back speaking with you tonight. I'm going to open up my presentation and share my screen in just a minute. Before I do, a quick sort of reminder of who I am. My name is Tyler Bump. I'm a project director at Eco Northwest, and have had the privilege of working with Eugene staff on this project and with you all as members of the community as part of this work. Today, I'm going to share with you some of our feasibility results, an analysis that we did on looking at how middle housing could perform in Eugene, what kinds of housing are likely to get built, different price points that it's likely to get built at, and then talk a little bit more about the potential code packages, the allow, encourage, incentivize, and what that means relative to the minimum compliance of HB 2001. I'm going to try to share my screen right now. So bear with me for just a moment. All right, can everybody see that okay? All right. So I'll just jump into it. So we did this feasibility analysis to look at a few things. One is across Eugene in different, we sort of characterized neighborhood areas that had similar market conditions. What is the rate of potential change that could happen from HB 2001 in terms of middle housing development? What kinds of middle housing are most likely? What price points are those at? So the results from our analysis, I'll sort of share the key points over here and then walk through what this chart means and how to interpret this chart. So we found that middle housing is financially feasible in all areas of Eugene, but generally in a small percentage of the overall parcels across the city. More parcels are feasible for middle housing than for single family development. So that means that more development is likely, more housing is likely to be possible with middle housing than without middle housing. The way to interpret this chart is the gray bars represent the total number of parcels in the single dwelling zone or HB 2001 possible parcels that exist in each of these areas. The pink bars represent the number of parcels where middle housing development might be feasible. And the orange bars represent the parcels where single family detached development as it is today could be feasible in those parcels. And what this shows us, I'll use the let's see, southeast area that we have here as an example. Somewhere around 5,200 parcels that we looked at that are eligible for HB 2001 middle housing. And of those, about 500 or so, a little over 500 of those parcels would be possible for financially feasible for middle housing. And then a smaller share that is financially feasible for single family housing. So this is kind of how we were looking at the scale or the rate of change and where spatially different neighborhoods, different areas of Eugene could see more or less middle housing depending on market conditions. The next thing we did was look at differences in different middle housing types. So looking at duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes, cottage clusters, how those different housing types perform relative to each other. So that's to say, if you allow all of these things, which ones are the most likely that we might see as housing options that would be built across Eugene? And what we found is that townhouses are likely to be the most feasible in most areas. So ownership townhouse units. Student-oriented middle housing may work close to the university, but there aren't really a lot of suitable properties of parcels that are eligible for that use, although it is an attractive or a feasible use where those do exist closer to the university. And many middle housing types are more financially feasible than single family housing, but they can still face other challenges. And some of those other challenges that might exist is it's unclear yet what the demand for this type of housing would be. My sense is that there is some sort of pent-up demand for middle housing as both a rental product and an ownership product. But because it hasn't been broadly allowed, it's kind of hard to get a sense of what that demand would look like, as well as to get a sense of what developers' decision making might be and contractors' decision making might be to build these types. So just because it's a newer thing at the scale that we're talking about, it's a little hard to get a handle on utilization of that. One note on this chart, very confusing chart with lots of data points on it, so things for folks to dig into. If you're interested after the presentation or later on at a point in time, these are also in the memos and reports that we've written. But pretty much for each of these housing types, we have the level of feasibility. So if it's higher up, if that dot is higher up, which represents each of the areas for each of these housing types, that means it's more feasible. So what this shows us is that townhomes, sort of high-end townhomes here, and mid-range townhomes here are the most feasible middle housing types, but that also fourplexes, middle-range fourplexes, middle-range duplexes are also pretty feasible. And actually all of these housing types are feasible in different locations throughout Eugene as well. All right, and so a little bit of piece on the pricing side of things, which I know a lot of you all have had discussion about, and that is the difference in affordability between middle housing types and single family. So what we have here is this middle range single family type with average prices between each of the areas. So generally between, say, $425,000 to almost $500,000 for a mid-range detached single family home, new construction detached single family home. And then with middle housing, that math changes because of the size of the units, the efficiency of the land, being able to spread land costs across more units, where you get a wider range. So for example, a mid-range townhome as a comparison to a mid-range single family, you're looking at almost $350,000 to $400,000. So generally about $75,000 less for a townhome than a detached single family, and similar scale differences for fourplex and triplex as well. And then we also looked at rental pricing by development type as well. And what we're finding is that middle housing types in 2 and 3 bedroom units specifically are likely to rent probably between 80% and 100% AMI or MFI at that price point across all middle housing types, mid-range middle housing types here. So the next thing that we did, the questions were, what if we wanted to see more less expensive rental housing? What can we do? What are the options on the table? And so what we did, and I apologize for the blurriness of this chart here on the screen, but what we did is test the code packages, the allow, encourage, incentivize code packages to see how the different housing types might perform under each of these. And so the differences in these code packages are really minimum lot size and parking requirements. And so when you change those things, does it make middle housing more feasible? Is one of the questions. And the other question is, does it make middle housing less expensive? And the answer to that question is yes. With both of those things, changes to minimum lot size, changes to parking requirements, it makes middle housing more feasible and also makes it less expensive. What we found doing this is that there is a slight increase in feasibility going to the encourage code package. So anything that's higher than, so here's the allow here, the range of bars is the range of feasibility. So as those bars get higher up compared to the previous one, that indicates to us that it's more feasible, that package code package is more feasible. And so this incentivized code package is more likely to support more housing and more diverse housing options in the incentivized package than in the allow package. So the question then is, how much more affordable does encourage or allow make housing, middle housing, under each of these code packages? And so we've looked at a range of prices depending on the housing type. In the allow code package, we're looking at affordability, and this is for a 2-bedroom, 3-person unit. We're looking at that's affordable to a household, I think, making about $60,000 a year. We're looking at about 75 to 94% AMI. So broadly in that 80 to 100% AMI category that I mentioned before. In the encourage code package, it makes it a little more affordable, down to 74%, 93%. And then the incentivized code package, you can see that it makes things about 4 to 5% drop in affordability by AMI. So about 71% to 89% AMI. And just to give a sense of pricing of what that means, this box on this chart shows the monthly housing costs. So looking generally between about $1,150 a month or so up to about $1,500 a month is that price range that we're talking about of affordability for these housing units.
Hey, Tyler, real quick.
Yes.
There was a question in the chat that was answered, but can you say out loud for everybody what AMI stands for?
Sure. AMI stands for area median income. And it's sort of, we use it interchangeably sometimes with MFI, which is median family income. And that's an affordability standard that's developed by HUD, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development. Sort of an affordability threshold that's used for affordable housing, mostly affordable housing finance. But it's a way for us to sort of compare affordability levels of different unit types, different household types, to get a sense of how policy options differ and how affordable housing is funded in many cases. Thank you for the clarification, for the question. I did want to keep the presentation short today and make sure that we had time for questions and conversation. And I know that it is past 7:30 now on a Thursday night, and there was just a lot of charts and numbers in here. So I did want to make sure that we have time for questions. So that is the end of my presentation that I have tonight. And I guess we can just open it up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tyler. So the floor is open now. Use the raise hand feature and the reactions button, or feel free to just physically raise your hand and I'll try to call on you. Who has a question for Tyler? Yeah, go ahead, Abigail.
Could you put that last slide just back up? It's taken me a sec to like really look at it. That last slide with the AMI, the different rents and housing types. Could you just leave it up so I can like meditate on it there for a sec?
Yeah, sure.
While we all meditate on this, Abigail, if a question occurs to you, feel free to pop in with that, or anyone else feel free to raise their hand about this or another part of Tyler's presentation.
And Taylor, to clarify, the width of the box on the lower end is the incentivize, and on the other end is the allow?
It's this actually shows the range of about 70% to almost 94%. So this is across the whole spectrum, but the incentivize, for example, is let's say right here, the 71% AMI. If you went with the allow package, well, I guess 71% would be closer to here. But if you went with the allow package, it's just a little bit further over. So the ultimate it makes the incentivized package improves affordability more than the encouraged package, and that it does so by about 5% on percentage basis points on or percentage on the AMI level. So if you look over here, the allow is 75% to 94% AMI, and incentivized 71% to 89%, and the lower the number goes, the more affordable it is.
We've got another request just to clarify what MFI means again. Do you mind?
MFI is median family income.
Thank you. All right, I see a hand from Taryn. Go ahead, Taryn.
Hey, Tyler, I was just wondering, there was some debate today on parking. Would you say that the lot size or the parking is more impactful for the cost and feasibility of these being built?
That's a great question. They sort of work together, to be honest with you. So if you reduce the lot size, it gets harder to make the parking requirements work. And so there's a physical component to it. From a feasibility perspective, I don't know off the top of my head which one is more impactful, but I do know that if you were to maintain the parking requirements and shrink the lot size, you're really constraining the amount of that lot that can be built for the number of units. So it would do other funky things to making that physically possible, or seeing the amount of units. So you might see more development on smaller lots with fewer units if you had the same parking requirements. But they, from a feasibility perspective, they do work together.
Thanks, Taryn. All right, I see a hand from Jose. Go ahead, Jose.
Tyler, I'm assuming you've seen the summary of draft code amendments that have been shared with the panelists. What advice would you have for us based on what the city is, or what is being recommended for the city?
Great question. If I were, and I don't know that I have a place to make, if it's my place to make sort of what my recommendations would be, I would say, given the city's policy goals of supporting a broader range of housing options and more affordable housing, I think considering the encourage and incentivize advances those policy goals. Allow helps, I brought this up with the city council, is that certainly allowing middle housing types improves the likelihood of less expensive housing. And that thinking about the encourage and incentivize is a way to make those, again, less expensive than the allow. So I think they're generally improvements. Both encourage and incentivize are improvements on affordability and more housing, which also improves affordability, if you were trying to advance those policy goals.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. I see Judy's hand. Go ahead, Judy. Oh, you're on mute, Judy. And while Judy's unmuting, Taryn, would you mind lowering your hand?
I'm looking at the different prices and all these, the cost of all these different housing. So are we talking about different neighborhoods when you're putting these prices on homes? And I'm thinking, some of these aren't affordable for the more expensive houses, and yet you're looking at all ranges of incomes as well. But it seems to me like we should be looking at, I guess, the more affordable housing for the majority of the people that need it. That is,
sure.
but the fact is that it's, I'm looking at the different prices, and I was shocked to see them up at such a high range.
Yeah, so the feasibility, from the feasibility perspective, is that in order to get these housing types to be more affordable, significantly more affordable, would require some level of public subsidy to be able to make that happen. And so what we're trying to do is to think about the tools or the options that are available in the zoning code to be able to drive affordability down that doesn't necessarily require additional public subsidy to be able to make that happen.
I'm not seeing any other hands at the moment. I'm curious, Abigail, now that you've had a moment to sit with us, did you have a question about the slide?
No, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to understand it a little bit better.
There's Abigail, there's a lot of information in this chart, but there's occupations, annual income by occupation, monthly rent costs, monthly home ownership costs. And again, this is all for a 3-person household, and this whole chart depends on the household size. So if you were a 2-person household or a 4-person household, that affordability level changes because your unit size and unit type would change as well. But this example is for a 3-person household.
Why is this being brought to us now?
Cheryl, actually, I think we had a question from Will first, and then we'll go back to you. And I think those will be our last 2 questions for this section. So let's do Will.
Tyler, I have a quick question for you about the minimum setback requirement. Someone from city staff was telling us the other day that minimum setback requirements you all had done some market research that had kind of guided your recommendation for using the allow package for minimum setbacks. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. If I'm recalling correctly, please correct me or not.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look through our first memo. But we did look through other cities and how they approach middle housing, and not necessarily in a single dwelling zone context, but this type of housing and how it's been built and what the market generally is providing in terms of setbacks and how that's worked in other jurisdictions. So we did look at that to help not necessarily inform the allow recommendations, but to make sure that we weren't proposing anything that would be prohibitive to these development types happening. So we looked at some examples of similar development types across other communities, other development projects in Eugene as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then Cheryl, did you, okay, go ahead, Lynn, you were going to answer Cheryl's question.
Yes, I'm curious why this wasn't brought up earlier in the process.
Lynn, you're on mute, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on mute. My bad. Just as a process point, I guess Tyler can probably answer this too. But this report that this is based on just came out quite recently. Is that right, Tyler?
Yeah, I think it was actually just published as for the Planning Commission package yesterday, and we just finished it up last week on the evaluating the code packages. The feasibility work is also pretty new. So that has the feasibility work and the memo we've finished up since the last time I've spoken with you. So within the last, I think 6 weeks or so, 4 to 6 weeks or so. So it's all really new information.
Okay, thank you.
You all are getting it hot.
And as sort of a process point,
Mhm.
I'll just add that this sort of affordability conversation may feel like kind of an extra thing, and maybe I didn't explain that very well, but the steering committee and also based on your recommendations or your principles and how affordability focused they were, the steering committee recommended sort of an additional kind of bit of affordability specific conversation at the end of this process. So that's why this hour is here.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Lynn. And I see one more hand, so I think we have time to take another couple minutes. So let's finish up our Q&A with Robert. You're on mute, Robert.
Thank you for joining us, Tyler. My question goes to how much of the actual houses can be built based on these incentives. At the risk of generalizing, we can say that the motivation for a developer is profit, right? So the profitability of the development would be the driver for this. With the proposed allow, encourage, and incentivize, okay, what is your sense that the bulk of the development would scale downwards towards the lower price than the more profitable, higher, bigger units? What's your sense of that? And do you have, say, a study of that or an analysis of that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I would probably go back to a couple of the slides that we did on the feasibility in the sort of allow package, which is the first one that we evaluated. If you look at the parcels that are financially feasible, so the pink bars here, there are slight improvements on the feasibility for certain housing types. Townhomes still perform the best. So ownership townhomes still perform the best, even with the encourage and incentivize. The incentivize package specifically does make smaller, less expensive rentals closer to feasibility or that profit margin, Robert, as you described, as townhomes. So the question is, one of the questions that we were asked is how would we make rental more likely over townhomes, and how would we make those more affordable? And that's the evaluation that we did here, and it gets them closer. It's an improvement to make those more likely to occur, as you described, from a developer's perspective that's looking for from that sort of profit-driven perspective to reach that sort of threshold level of development feasibility.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for the great questions. And thank you so much, Tyler, for coming back and speaking to us again. So now we're going to have just a few minutes to integrate all the information that just came at you. And so if you were taking notes during that presentation, take a moment to kind of sit with those, to think about the slides you just saw. Just a few minutes to process in whatever ways you'd like. Another option is to take a look at the economic analysis from Tyler's group that was sent to you by email this morning. But no need to navigate there, only go and look at that if you're confident you can make it back to join us again in Zoom. So those are just a few options. We're going to take 5 minutes and just have some quiet processing time and come back at 7:55, unless there's anything you need to add now, Lynn.